Ladies and gentlemen, this is the final score with
Eric. How about them Cowboys saw ya?
And I'm the new elected mayor for John's Nation, Matthew Basemore.
And Stevie Reno Klein.
What's up, guys? The final score is back again tonight, and I'm on my own tonight. I've decided to want to do an interview. This is a Facebook page that I've been watching for a while. You guys know we talk a lot of sports from the final score. That's what we are. We're a sports podcast. But I am a big fan of the old days. I'm a retro guy. I love the stuff now, but I have so many memories as a kid of football in the past growing up and some of these games, not just Steeler games, guys, because you know I'm a diehard Steeler fan, not just Steeler games, but just games that you watched as a kid and some of the greatest games you will ever see and some of the biggest memories I've had are games that took place in the old Orange Bowl in Miami. So I'm going through Facebook, and this has been a while back. I'm going through Facebook one day, and you know how Facebook suggests pages to you, and I must have been on a rabbit hole looking at old football games or something, Miami Hurricanes or something like that, and I get suggested a page, Ghost of the Orange Bowl, and I'm like, okay, what is this all about? So I of course I check it out, and I immediately liked it. Uh, Guys, if you haven't checked it out, check it out. If you're a fan of especially if you're like a Dolphins or a Hurricanes fan or a fan of the old Orange Bowl, check this page out. With me tonight is the guy that is in charge of that page, the creator of that page, Mr. Jay Rao. Rhymes with cow. I remember you told me. Jay Rao. And man, like I said, check his page out, guys. We're going to talk a little bit with him tonight about his fandom, about the Orange Bowl, about the Hurricanes, the Dolphins, whatever. And a little surprising thing he told me just a few minutes ago when we talked. We've been talking back and forth about games in the Orange Bowl, and he didn't tell me this till tonight before we went on air. A little something about one of the most famous games that happened in the Orange Bowl. But welcome to the show, Jay. How you doing, buddy?
Great, Stevie. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, we had a little technical difficulties. That's why we're a little late getting started, but we got it ironed out. But man, glad to have you here. Been wanting to get you up here for a long time, and glad you were able to work it out. First of all, what made you decide to do this page, the Ghost of the Orange Bowl? I mean, great page, by the way. I mean, it's one of my favorite pages. I love seeing the updates here. What made you decide to go out and do a Facebook page like this?
Well, first of all, I'm a huge sports history geek, and I'm a local history geek. And living in South Florida, I've lived in South Florida for 36 years, and I remember I was trying to look up information about the Orange Bowl, and every page that I found basically had stuff that I already knew, and I couldn't find a page that really satisfied my curiosity. So I decided, you know what? Why don't I just make my own page and kind of do kind of a tribute to the old stadium. And I started it way back in 2012, and here we are, 12 years later, and I'm still doing it. And I've been posting like a little bit every day, and I try to keep it fresh with some new material. Sometimes we'll recycle some old stuff, we keep track of like the birthdays of some of the famous and not so famous players and coaches. And basically my goal is to document, I don't know if I can actually do this, but document just about every game that's been played at the Orange Bowl. And that might be kind of not impossible, but it keeps me busy, and it keeps me it keeps the page fresh, and there's always new material to add to the page.
Look, I'll go ahead and tell you, just when I was glancing through the page today or this afternoon, I'm not only a big time football, any kind of sports fan, I have been a diehard wrestling fan since I was a kid, and you posted today the 1987 Great American Bash took place
Yes.
in the Orange Bowl, the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express, a great feud there. But yeah, I look Crockett Country right down here in North Carolina, so that was always what I liked. And yeah, I remember them having that bash in the Orange Bowl, and that was a big undertaking for Crockett to go in the Orange Bowl.
Right, right, absolutely. In fact, that's not the only match from that night that I posted on the page. I
Yeah,
think there was like an 8-man tag team match.
was there War Games?
Yeah, yeah. It's either 10 or 8. I can't remember, but yeah, it was like I think it was the Road Warriors, Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff against Ric Flair, Lex Luger. I think the Four Horsemen, Arn Anderson, and I
Oh
think it
yeah,
was Tully Blanchard is the other one. Yeah.
yep, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I think they had, if I'm not mistaken, that was the War Games. They had the first War Games on July 4th in Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, and I think, and I may be wrong, people you fact checkers out there check with me. Uh, the last War Games for that year was at the Orange Bowl.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, that if I may be wrong, but yeah. So many. Not only did sporting events happen, the Orange Bowl hosted some great concerts. I know Prince in
Mhm.
1985 they changed the name of the Orange Bowl to the Purple Bowl for that day.
Yes.
Not just a coincidence as we're talking today. I think it was 40 years ago today, Prince released Purple Rain. So just one of my favorite albums of all time. I also do a music podcast, so you're going to find out. You and me are a lot alike. One guy told me one time, you know more useless information than anybody I know. I said, so
Yeah.
that's why I decided to do the podcast so I could get that useless information out. But
Same
yeah,
here. Same here. When it comes to the local sports in Miami, South Florida sports, people tell me that all the time. I'm a fountain of useless information. So I decided to make it useful.
exactly. That's why I do the podcast as well. So talk a little bit about as a kid growing up. What were your first memories? What got you into sports? Do you remember your first memory of like okay, this is what got me interested in sports?
Oh wow. Well, I mean, I was actually born in California, and in Oakland, and I moved to the Chicago area when I was very young. I was about 7 years old, and I had a neighbor at the time that I befriended, and he was into baseball. His dad was a former minor league player in the Baltimore Orioles organization,
Oh wow.
and he got me into baseball. And his dad ended up being both of our coaches. We were on the same little league team, and so I really the first sport I got into was baseball of all things. And at that time, I'd come home from school and I'd watch the Cub games on WGN. And, I'd watch the White Sox games at night. Um, so I watched a lot of baseball, and then I kind of gradually fell into football later on. Um, and at the time, I was actually a Chicago fan. I was a Chicago Bears fan,
Oh
I was a
yeah.
Cubs fan, um, Bulls fan. DePaul basketball was big in those days
Oh
too.
yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Joey
yeah.
Meyer. What Joey was it? Joey Meyer
It
that
was
was
actually his old man, Ray Meyer.
Ray Meyer. Ray
Yeah,
Meyer. Yeah, I remember. I do remember the Myers.
yeah.
But you talk about, and this is what we're going to get to, you guys. We were talking when I asked him to come on the show. We were talking about some of the great games in the Orange Bowl, some of the favorite games, and one of them we talked about was the Dolphins Bears game.
Hmm.
And I did not know till tonight when he was talking about it. He said, "Yeah, you were actually a Bears fan when that took place."
Yes, yes. I actually was rooting for the Bears, and at the time, the Bears were 12-0, and they were kind of flirting with a perfect season. And they came down to Miami, where the only perfect season was accomplished, and the Dolphins were ready. They brought out the old 72 guys on the sidelines. The stadium was packed, and as a Bear fan watching at home, I was like horrified. I was like, oh my goodness, I've never seen such a buzzsaw in my life. When they went down there, it was like, I guess it was what Custer must have experienced back in the day. But but yeah, and I was amazed at the atmosphere of the Orange Bowl. And then my father, who was an engineer, he got transferred to Miami the next year, in 1986, and I moved to Miami that year. And I've been in South Florida ever since. And I started going to games at the Orange Bowl. My first game was the Oklahoma Miami game, Vinny Testaverde
yeah.
against Brian Bosworth.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is amazing stuff. I was like, I fell in love with that stadium right away. And then I went to a couple of Dolphin games there, and it just happened to be the Dolphins' last season at the Orange Bowl before they moved to their current stadium. But at the time, Joe Robbie Stadium at that time. But yeah, and I just love the Orange Bowl, and I became hooked, and I started going to Miami games all the time, and I became a huge Dolphin and Canes fan. I've been down here for 36 years and still go.
Yeah, going back to that Bears game though, you had, and no offense to him, but uh, you being a Bears fan at the time, Steve Fuller being the starting quarterback that night did not fare well for it. Y'all had a great defense, no doubt about it, and the Dolphins torched that defense that night. But Steve Fuller at quarterback instead of Jim McMahon, I mean, it
Yeah, what
didn't look.
happened was Steve Fuller started the game, and yeah, he had a rough time in that one. I think I especially remember that when the Bears got close to the west end zone. The west end zone is the famous closed end zone of the Orange Bowl, and that's where all the noise comes from. It's legendary. It's the area of the stadium where the rowdiest people sit. It's a wall of noise, if I could describe it to you. And I've seen so many quarterbacks just have terrible, just a terrible time trying to call signals. This is back in the days. Back then, they didn't use silent counts.
No.
Quarterbacks in those days, they were calling it with their voices and everything. They didn't use hand signals or silent counts. That all came a little later. So guys like Steve Fuller, Ron Jaworski, I remember Jamel Holloway of Oklahoma, another one, had a lot of trouble in that end of the stadium. Tony Rice, I remember at Notre Dame, he was another one that had a lot of trouble with it. I've seen so many quarterbacks, college and pro, just pull their hair out literally trying to get a playoff.
Yeah, watching that game last night, I actually getting ready for today. I said I'm gonna watch this game again and just get myself refreshed on the game. But yeah, there were several times at that end of the field that he had to stop. They had to stop the game. That was back, and I was like, gosh, I had forgot all about the referees would stop the game at least once,
Right.
and let them try to get the crowd to die down. But that just got the crowd even louder when you did that. I mean, that didn't work. And Joe Namath, the play-by-play guys for that game, this is a all-star lineup: Frank Gifford, Joe Namath, and O.J. Simpson.
That's right.
And I remember Joe Namath saying, they're gonna have to make some rule changes about this noise. I said, what can you do? You can't make the crowd shut up. I mean, but yeah, that end of the field, and it was always at that one end of the field when Fuller would ask the referee to stop the game. He couldn't get his signals across. But yeah, the old Orange Bowl, some great games. And look, let me tell you, I don't know how you feel about it. I love football to this day, but back in the day, when they had like the build up for some of these games, like that 1986 Oklahoma Miami game, there was nothing like that. When you had the build up for these games, like CBS would show, because I'm from a small town. We never got cable here, so the only games I got to see were like CBS games. But the build up for like the Oklahoma Miami games, the Miami Notre Dame games that CBS did was incredible, and just made me like, oh gosh, this is the game of the century. Every game they did was like the game of the century, and so many great games back then. But just like you said with that Oklahoma Miami game that you were at, Bosworth versus Testaverde. I mean, that build up was so great. But yeah, just some great games back in the day, especially in that Orange Bowl. So Let's see. You said your first game was the Dolphins Oklahoma game. How
No,
many games do you
University
think?
of Miami, Oklahoma game.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
Sorry about that. How many games do you think you went to see in the Orange Bowl?
Ooh, that's a good question. Man, well, I probably went to at least two or three each year when the Hurricanes were still there. So got from like 1986 to 2007. Ooh, maybe about 50 or something
Wow.
like that. 50 somewhat games. Yeah.
Wow. So being the historian that you are, especially on the Orange Bowl, what was what caused them to just implode the Orange Bowl, to destroy the Orange Bowl?
Well, for a long time, the Orange Bowl was, the city of Miami just did not do a very good job of keeping the Orange Bowl in shape, and it just seemed like every time a bond issue was up for election, it was always voted down, and it got to the point where the Dolphins probably started the the destruction of the Orange Bowl. I can trace to when the Dolphins left the stadium because that was the first major domino to fall. Because Joe Robbie, for the longest time, who was the owner of the Miami Dolphins, he demanded that the city do something about that stadium because it really was antiquated. I mean, there were no escalators. There were, the bathrooms were terrible. You had to pee in a trough. It was just
Oh yeah.
I can't imagine what the Roman Colosseum was like, but it probably wasn't that much more modern than the Orange Bowl was. It was a stadium with just hard hard benches to sit on. It was just it was not a very comfortable place, and it needed to be upgraded, and the city just wouldn't do it. And then it got to the point where the Orange Bowl game left the stadium. Then the University of Miami had to make a decision, and they decided to leave. And basically, the city of Miami, rather than build a new stadium for the Orange Bowl, they negotiated with the Florida Marlins at the time, and they reached a deal where they would build a stadium for the Marlins, which is the stadium that now occupies where the Orange Bowl is, Lone Depot Park, originally known as Marlins Park. And I've been there a few times. It's actually a very beautiful stadium. I know a lot of people don't like it, especially the old diehards. So I know a lot of people who refuse to set foot in that place, but believe me, it is a nice facility. But it just isn't the same. You can't. Some things
Yeah,
just cannot be replaced, and it's no coincidence that the Hurricanes and the Dolphins haven't been the same since they moved out of the Orange Bowl.
this is true. This is true. You didn't have that hurricane dynasty like you had back in the in the entire decade of the 80s. Um, yeah, and the five Super Bowls in that Orange Bowl, and it holds a special place in my heart because two of the Super Bowls the Steelers won there
Right.
at the and both of them over the Cowboys. Eat it, Cowboy fans. Eat it, Cowboy fans. So
Yeah, if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan, you probably hate the Orange Bowl because they
yeah,
lost three Super Bowls there, and I think the only game the Cowboys ever won at the Orange Bowl was a game called the Playoff Bowl. And I don't know if your listeners or you are aware of the Playoff Bowl, but before there was a before the AFL and NFL merged, the NFL used to host a postseason game that decided third place. I
oh
kid you
yeah,
not. I mean,
yeah,
they,
I
they
do
took the
remember
second
that.
place teams of the Eastern and Western conferences, and they played a game in Miami called the Playoff Bowl. And the players didn't want to be there, the coaches didn't want to be there, and the fans, it was their only taste of pro football during the year. So it would get some decent crowds, but it was kind of a joke.
I don't think I'd want to go play for third place.
Right, right. It would
But
be the equivalent of the loser of the AFC and NFC championship games playing each other.
exactly. I
Right.
mean, I don't think I'd want to do that if I was a NFL player either. So, talking about memorable games,
Mhm.
and you guessed one of my games, the most memorable game I remember watching at the Orange Bowl was, what was it, 80? Was it 81 or 82? The playoff.
Yeah, it was January 82, but it was the 81 season, but it was
Yeah.
played January 2nd, 82. Yeah.
The Miami Dolphins and the San Diego Chargers. The Kellen Winslow game,
Mhm.
as so many people like to call it. I can remember as a kid watching. So I'm like 8 years old, and I'm in the middle. I mean, I've got football cards. I was big into that, and everything football that I could get my hands on. Magazines, posters, everything. Between that and I'm a big Kiss fan, the rock band Kiss fan. So Star Wars, football, and Kiss was what I was into. So we actually uh, watching that game, and my brother, he switched teams like you switch underwear. I mean, he was like a Rena fan, but he would latch onto a team because of players. And one of the players he liked was Dan Fouts.
Mhm.
And we were watching that game, and we actually had to leave and go to a Christmas party in the middle of that game,
Oh.
and then came back, and the game was still on. And I was like, holy crap. So years later, when the internet came along, I started tape trading with people over different things, over ball games. And this game, a guy had this game, and I'm like, I've got to have this game. I missed a certain part of that game. So I sat there and watched it. One of my favorite games ever to watch. And I'm not, like I said, I'm a Steelers fan, not a Chargers fan or a Dolphins fan. But that game was so incredible for the Chargers to go up 28-0 early in that game. And it just looks like the Dolphins can get blown out. David Woodley gets taken out of the game. And David Woodley was one of those quarterbacks for the Dolphins that Dolphins fans don't like to talk about a lot, I don't think. Don Strock.
Yep.
I hated to see Don Strock ever come in the game because that meant the Dolphins were getting ready to come back. And he led them back. They go into overtime, and with Kellen Winslow on the verge of exhaustion, blocks a kick to keep the game in overtime. And I think the Chargers end up winning 41-38. But what an incredible game! You remember watching that game?
Yes, I do. I was actually living in Illinois at that time, but I watched the entire game. And actually, what happened was San Diego actually went up 24-0, and
Right.
and Woodley got pulled in the second quarter, and Don Strock came in and he just tore it up.
He did it up.
You know what's amazing about that game is that I don't know if a lot of people know this, but it was the first game in NFL history where two quarterbacks threw for over 400 yards in the same game.
Oh,
And
wow.
Strock basically did it in 3 quarters.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have a first quarter. He didn't play. But the game did go deep into overtime. So maybe you can count that as a quarter. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, can you imagine what he would have had if he played the whole game?
Oh gosh. It may have been a different story for Chargers fans out there. So but yeah, that game, because that game I remember the famous first time I ever saw a hook and lateral play. Tony Nathan, that's one of the legendary Dolphins right there to me. Tony Nathan, I don't think gets mentioned enough as a Dolphin. He was always one of the workhorses for those teams especially in the early to mid '80s. But yeah, because he got overshadowed a lot. I mean, you had Marino come along, and then you had who was the other running back that they had? Under Franklin.
Under Franklin, sure.
Yeah, under Franklin. But Tony Nathan was always a Dolphin that probably one of my favorite Dolphins that, especially in that era.
Good one. Yeah, I mean, Tony Nathan, yeah, he scored on the hook and lateral. You mentioned Under Franklin before. Under Franklin played a huge role in the outcome of that Chargers game because he was the one that actually had the fumble that led to the tying touchdown for the Chargers in regulation that sent it to overtime. Had he not fumbled the ball, the Dolphins probably would have won that game. But we'll never know.
Yeah, that's part of the game.
Yeah.
What did you think? I mean, being a Dolphin fan and looking back at the history now, what do you think about David Woodley?
David Woodley kind of has a complicated history. He had to follow Bob Greasy, and he also preceded Dan Marino. And I posted something on Ghost the Orange Bowl not too long ago about how basically everybody says that Tua Tagovailoa, the current Dolphins quarterback, is so, how shall I say, scrutinized by Dolphin fans.
Yeah.
And everything is scrutinized. And I brought this to the table. What if there was social media when David Woodley played?
Oh, good Lord.
Woodley was all over the place. And I mean, so many times he had to be relieved by Don Strock. They kind of had this thing called Woodstock, where they started Woodley, and then they would bring Strock off the bench like he was a relief pitcher. And a lot more often than not, it seemed like Strock would always bail out Woodley out of. Woodley would get himself into a jam, and Strock would have to bail him out of it. It's but what the thing about Woodley though is that he also did some very good things with the Dolphins. He did help take them to the Super Bowl in 1982, and I think a lot of people forget the playoff run he had that year. He had some very good games against New England and San Diego in that 82 playoff season. And a lot of people forget that, and they wouldn't have gotten to the Super Bowl without him, that one year. But, when you follow Bob Greasy and you're sandwiched in between Greasy and Marino, that's tough. It's like following a legend. It's almost impossible,
Here's my thing with David Woodley.
Mm.
Okay, you got the Dolphins decide they're going to get Marino. They get rid of Woodley. Guess where Woodley ends up? Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Instead of us getting Marino right in our backyard, we end up with David Woodley. I mean, gosh, what a choice there.
But David Woodley's kind of a sad story too. He had a lot of issues. I think he was very uncomfortable with the limelight of being an NFL quarterback, and it got to him. He developed a drinking problem. It was well documented, and that led to his liver disease, and which he passed away from some years ago. And it's a very sad story. One of those guys that he just, not everybody is able to handle that kind of celebrity, and David Woodley was one of those guys who just couldn't handle the pressure of being an NFL quarterback. It's very sad.
So he actually finished his career in Pittsburgh, was on the practice squad with Green Bay, but never played for them. So, yeah.
Right.
And I do remember, as the rest of my family being Redskin fans, that Redskin Dolphins Super Bowl with David Woodley. And one of the first plays of the game, he hits Jimmy Cephalo right down on a long pass for a touchdown. And all the Redskin fans in the house were like, oh, my God, this game is over. It's already over. But
I think it was only one of his 4 completions of the game or something.
It wasn't any more after that.
Yeah,
Any more
he didn't
after
have
that.
a good second half. I don't even think they got a first down, or not more than a couple of first downs the second half.
But my thing is, he had, let's see, I'm reading it now. Despite starting the game well with the 76-yard touchdown pass to Cephalo, Woodley and the entire offense in struggle with no completions and 8 attempts in the second half. Wow. Threw it about 8 times in the second half.
Yeah.
But I just never understood. You talk about the Woodstock situation. Mm-hmm. After a while, and believe me, this is nothing compared to a Don Shula coach. I'm a volunteer coach. I coached high school football for 15 years. Mm-hmm. After a while, though, if you keep pulling Woodley, wouldn't it ever enter your mind, maybe we should just start Don Strock?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of people have asked, why didn't Strock start? And the reason is that Strock actually did start some games back in the 70s, early in his career, and for whatever reason, I don't know what it is, Don Strock was just not good when he started games. He was not good at all. And for whatever reason, I think Don was one of those guys. He was very analytical. I think he was one of those guys who would he would take he would kind of take mental notes when he was watching a game and pick up on things as the game went along. And he was one of those people who was able to diagnose a defense after watching the defense play for a little bit. And when he came off the bench, he knew what to do. But for whatever reason, when he would start a game, it just didn't go very well. And so he was one of those guys one of those unique talents that just was more comfortable coming off the bench than actually starting.
Yeah, I got you. That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, so you get converted to a Dolphin and a Hurricane fan after you go down there. We talked a little bit about the Hurricane. What was probably your favorite Hurricane game in the Orange Bowl?
Oh God, I would have to say the loudest one that I've ever been to was the 89 game against Notre Dame. They came down here, I think they had a 23 game win streak. And the year before they had the Catholics versus convicts game up in
Yeah,
South Bend.
yeah,
So that was a very controversial game. There was a lot of bad blood between the two programs at the
oh yeah,
time. And so when they came down here, they had a 23 game win streak. And a lot of Miami people felt like that game was taken from them. Everybody looks back at that Cleveland Gary play where I don't know how they called a fumble on that, but they did. And that took away a touchdown from Miami, and Miami ended up losing by 1 point. And so Miami stewed on that for a whole year and waited for Notre Dame to come down here, and they took it out on them that night.
definitely did. 81,000 people at that game, and they whip up on Notre Dame 27-10. And that's another CBS game. CBS did a great job back in the day.
Oh yeah,
with these games. I love CBS games. All right, what about your favorite Dolphin game?
Ooh, favorite Dolphin game now. Now, most of my Dolphin games were at Joe Robbie Stadium because remember, I only went to a couple of games at the Orange Bowl.
Okay, so being a Dolphins fan that you are now, we'll talk about your Dolphins fandom. What is your favorite Dolphins game that you went to?
Oh wow, I'd have to say, wow, the best Dolphin game. That's a good one. Maybe when they faced one of the playoff games against the Buffalo Bills game in '98 when they played. I think Doug Flutie was actually the quarterback for Buffalo, believe it or not, at that time.
Right.
And that was a good game, actually. Another one actually that sticks out. Actually, I'll tell you what. The last playoff game, the Dolphins actually won, and this goes back 24 years ago.
Oh wow.
2000. Lamar Smith scores the winning touchdown in overtime. He had over 200 yards, which is still the Dolphin playoff record. And yeah, that game was a great game. That was definitely probably my favorite game.
That is amazing, though. Did you think about it? That it's been 24 years since the Dolphins won a playoff game.
Yeah, it was against the Colts. Peyton Manning was on that team. Edgerrin James and Reggie Wayne wasn't there yet, though.
Was Marvin Harrison there yet?
Yeah, Marvin Harrison was there.
Right. Yeah, it was 23-17 in overtime. Then the next week wasn't so good. 27-0 loss to the Raiders. So talk a little bit about, were you a big Marino fan?
Oh yeah. Marino is actually who made me a Dolphin fan because as I mentioned before, I was rooting for the Bears when they came down to Miami in '85. And when I moved down to South Florida in '86, I got to see Marino play a lot. And it made me appreciate what an amazing talent he was. I got to see him play just about every game. And I haven't seen anything quite like him. I mean, there are a lot of quarterbacks that throw for a lot of yards, but I haven't seen anybody who has the same quick release, and the velocity. Not necessarily. I mean, there are quarterbacks, believe it or not, that have stronger arms than Marino, but the release, the accuracy, and the zip on the ball with the accuracy that Marino had, I've never seen anything like it. I still haven't.
Yeah, and Miami is kind of like Pittsburgh was, because Miami has since Marino. I can't. I mean, have you guys had a high caliber quarterback since Marino? Like it's like us with Bradshaw until we got Roethlisberger. There
Right.
was so many. Oh gosh, we struggled through the Mark Malone, the Cliff Stouts, the Cordell Stewarts, the Neil O'Donnells, Kent Graham. I mean, so, and you guys have had what like Jay Fiedler, which wasn't he was decent, but what I'm talking about is a quarterback capable of taking you to a Super Bowl. You guys have had a hard time finding that quarterback since Marino.
Right, right. I think the fans are hoping that. I mean, a lot of people are hoping that Tua Tagovailoa is that guy. I I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know about that. I think that Tua is a solid quarterback. For him to take you to a Super Bowl, you'd have to have a great team around him.
right.
And I'm not sure the Dolphins have that supporting talent right now. I do think Tua is a solid quarterback though. But
Oh
when
yeah,
you're in a division with Josh Allen and you have to get by Patrick Mahomes and you have to get by Joe Burrow and you look at all these quarterbacks in the just in the AFC alone,
it's tough.
I just don't see where Tua is the guy that can take you there right now.
So what are you looking at your outlook for Miami this year? Are you guys gonna you feel like they're gonna take a step back from the season they had last year? Because they came out like gangbusters last year. The offense was putting 70 points on people, and then kind of the second half of the year kind of mellowed out a little bit, and then going to Kansas City in that cold. I know that had some kind of effect on the Dolphins, but what's your outlook for the Dolphins this year?
I think the Dolphins will be a solid team. I still expect a playoff season, and I think they lost some guys on defense, which kind of has me a little nervous. They lost Van Ginkel, they lost uh,
Wilkins.
the cornerback Xavier Howard. But I do think if they can stay, I think if they can stay healthy, I still think that they can be a playoff team this year. And you still have all your weapons back on offense. You still have Tyreek Hill, you still have Jalen Waddle, and you still have two of the fastest running backs in football, and A Chain and God, I'm drawing a blank on
Mostert.
what's that again?
Is it Mostert?
Mostert, yeah,
Yeah.
Mostert. And so there's still a lot of playmakers there, and they brought in Jonnu Smith at tight end. I think that's a little bit of an upgrade, and I think offensively they'll be fine. I think defensively is where I'm a little concerned because they did lose some of their guys. Christian Wilkins was another guy that they
Yeah,
lost last
that's a
year,
big
so
loss.
a little concerned with that. They brought in Calais Campbell, but he's kind of up there in years. But I don't know. I Are they a Super Bowl contender? Maybe not, but I think they're definitely a solid team that can make a run to the playoffs.
Right. AFC East
Mhm.
should be interesting this year with Aaron Rodgers maybe coming. I guess he's coming back for
Yeah.
more than one play this year. Uh, who do you feel like? And I think I'm going to know the answer to is the Dolphins' biggest rivals over time.
Well, I would say probably because there are a lot of them down here are the New York Jets.
Right.
Just from a historical standpoint, because there's so many New Yorkers that live down here in South Florida. But I think that's changed a little bit. I think the Buffalo Bills now, and it kind of reminds me of like the early 90s. Whenever the Bills are really good, all of a sudden their fans just show up here and take over our stadium. Literally. I mean, it kind of reminded me of, when I was watching the Stanley Cup final not too long ago, uh, the Edmonton fans, how passionate they are,
Right.
I mean, I guess they, they're so passionate because they got what else is there to do over there? It's Edmonton, but in Buffalo, I mean, what are you going to do in Buffalo? I mean,
Ooh. Here we go. Buffalo fans are going to start chiming in now.
So they all come down here, and their vacation is the Dolphin game. And they come down here in droves, and they literally take over the town. They do. Gotta give it to them.
That's one thing people say about Steeler fans. Steeler fans travel well. Like I remember one year, it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago, right when was it San Diego started playing in their new stadium, and it was like the announcers were just talking about, this looks like a Steelers home game here, and this is all the way across the country for them. It's more Steeler fans here, like 2-1 than Charger fans here, and that's kind of sad for the Charger people, but it makes me proud. It makes me proud to be a Steelers fan.
Well, I think the thing about Miami and also LA, and maybe Atlanta qualifies as is that they're transient cities, and that and I include myself in this, that just about everybody here is not really from Miami. Everybody comes from someplace else, and a lot of fans, I guess, hold on to the loyalties of their old teams where they came from. And so you get a lot, you got a lot of Steeler fans down here too, and you got your Jet fans, you got your Bills fans, you got your Patriots fans, you got your Browns fans. They're all down here. So whenever those teams play the Dolphins, they got a good cheering section. It's not like Boston, where everybody's from Boston. They have teams that have been around for 100 years. The Bruins, the Celtics, the Patriots, the Red Sox. Your dad was a Red Sox fan, your granddad, your great granddad. It goes, but here, our sports teams are really young. The Dolphins are the oldest, and they started in 1966. And like all of our teams, when I came down here in '86, all we had was the Dolphins. We didn't have the Marlins. We didn't have the Heat. We didn't have the Panthers. And the funny thing is that all three of those teams have won championships, and the Dolphins haven't won anything since '73.
Yeah, that's true. So, as far as get back to the Orange Bowl, what's one of the most unique events that's ever taken place there that you can think about? Something out of the realm that you wouldn't think would take place at the Orange Bowl.
Oh wow! Back in 1978, they had I don't know if they had a bunch of Hare Krishnas that were celebrating a holiday called Holi, which is an Indian holiday. It's a Hindu holiday, and they had thousands of people attend that. It's a unique it was a unique setting where I guess they had a yogi with a water cannon spraying people with water. It was if you've ever seen pictures of it, if you ever Google it, I'll have to post about it sometime again on the Go See Orange Bowl. But that's probably one of the more unusual things that have happened. I guess Bill McCartney, who used to be the head coach at Colorado, he had this group called the Promise Keepers, which was, I guess, it was like a conservative Christian group of men that it was. They kind of traveled around the country and kind of gave like lectures and talks about being good fathers and being husbands and all that stuff. I remember that, but I don't know if that's necessarily unusual or anything.
Right.
But
just looking at Wikipedia,
that was a little different.
Looking at Wikipedia, and you know how Wikipedia can get some bad information. Non-athletic events, one of the things I see up here that's kind of odd, the World Championships of Senior Citizens Dancing in 1984.
That I had no idea. I just learned something new.
And looking at, and of course, a lot of things in popular culture took place. There was a scene from Smokey and the Bandit 2 that was filmed there with Mean Joe Green and Terry Bradshaw, of all people. Steelers were there. Served as home of the fictional Miami Sharks in the Oliver Stone film Any Given Sunday. Okay, of course, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, some of the scenes were filmed there. And then Black Sunday, you remember that movie? Yeah.
Yeah. The Goodyear blimp crashing into the stadium.
Yeah. There was Super Bowl 10. I
Right.
remember that watching that movie the first time, and I was like thinking as a kid, because I was like maybe 5 or 6 years old when it actually came on network television, and thinking, is this really happening? It had the Steelers in it. I mean, it was real. But I was just like, well. Anyway, before we get out of here, like I said, guys, check him out. You can check him out on Facebook. Ghost of the Orange Bowl. He's got over 126,000 followers. Wow, that's freaking awesome there. But I'd love to get half of that on mine right now. But I'm just glancing through some of the stories, man. He's got football, mainly football right here lately. But he's got wrestling up there. Talks about Jerome Brown, of course, the Miami Hurricane and Philadelphia Eagle defensive lineman. Have you ever thought about writing a book, dude?
Yeah, you know what? Some people have suggested, maybe you should write a book. I was like thinking about maybe doing a coffee table book or something like that, or just maybe write some vignettes, if you will, or short stories about things that happened at the Orange Bowl or players that played there. I've thought about it. I don't know if I have the time or the dedication to do that.
That's the thing. That's the thing. Time is always the thing, buddy.
Or maybe I'm just plain lazy. But
I don't. With all this stuff you got up here, but I don't think you're lazy for it. I don't think it's lazy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it does take some dedication to do this. I've been doing it every day for about 12 years, just about every day. I mean, I've gone on vacations for a few times, but
Wow.
but for the most part,
I dare you take time off, dude.
Yeah.
But yeah, but guys, check it out. And you actually had a blog spot. Are you still active on that?
No, I haven't used that in years.
Yeah,
I started actually. That was kind of the Go See Orange Bowl before the Go See Orange Bowl. I started that way back in 2007, and I've written very sporadically there. So I basically keep everything on the Go See Orange Bowl Facebook page.
I got you. So I'll tell you what we need to do here. We need to bring you back and have you do your top 10 favorite Miami Dolphins of all time. How about that?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, and I'll make my list out for that. But yeah, guys, check out Ghost of the Orange Bowl on Facebook. Jay Rao, he's got some great stuff up here, and especially if you're a fan of that era of football, man, like Miami Hurricanes, stuff that went on at the Orange Bowl. I see some hockey up here. Are you a big hockey fan?
I used to work for the Panthers. I used to do some work.
Okay.
I used to work their matrix board years ago when they were really, really bad. We could barely get people into the arena, and it's just so awesome to see them on top right now. And because I know so many people that South Florida fans kind of get a bad rap as being front runners. But let me tell you something. I know a lot of Panther fans that have been diehard fans of that franchise. And they've seen the good and the bad, and mostly the bad of that team. And to see this team finally win a cup, I'm so happy for them.
Right.
Because we've known a lot of people that suffered a lot watching that team, and they're finally getting to bask in their glory. And hopefully maybe the Dolphin fans get to see that too, instead of talking about what happened in 1972.
The perfect season. I didn't even ask you. So what? I know that I'm a podcaster. I know podcasting doesn't pay the bills. What do you do for actually your real job?
Oh, real job? I write web pages for different companies like law firms and.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Basically, web content for their web pages, and SEO, basically to get their pages ranked high on Google.
Oh yeah. So
yeah.
You got a job there, bud. So before we get you out of here, I told you before, I said we got to do the 2-minute drill.
Oh boy.
So that's how they always finish up. So it's 2 minutes left. You're down by 3. You got to get down the field. So here we go. Some quick
Okay.
hitting questions. No wrong answers.
All right.
All right. Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Okay. Rather be at the lake or the beach?
The beach.
You're mine. Favorite food?
Oh wow, Mexican. Give me anything that's Mexican. I love anything that's spicy, but especially Mexican.
I got it. Favorite athlete?
Wow, growing up, Walter Payton.
Oh, yeah, being embarrassing. Favorite dessert?
Oh wow. I would say like a good hot fudge sundae.
I see. Now I'm getting hungry now. Pineapple on pizza or not?
I can do that, but it's not my preferred topping.
Okay. If you could play for any coach from the past or present, what coach would you play for?
Oh wow. I go with how can you not go with Don Shula? You know, I mean, maybe close second would be Jimmy Johnson.
Okay. And I meant to ask you about that. How did you feel about that transition from Shula to Johnson?
Wow, you know what? I wish Shula had gotten the opportunity to go out on his own terms. But there was a lot of pressure at the time to bring in Jimmy Johnson. A lot of fans. There's a lot of revisionist history down here. People are always saying, "Oh, they did Shula wrong" and all that stuff. But people wanted Shula out. They did.
Yeah,
I mean, they
I do remember that.
wanted Jimmy Johnson. When Johnson was hired, people were excited. They thought, okay, he won at he won at Dallas, and they thought he could do the same thing with the Dolphins. And pretty much his 4 years with the Dolphins wasn't much better than Shula's last 4 years during his term.
I don't know what went wrong there because I thought that was going to be. I thought he was actually going to turn the ship around, and the way he started drafting like he started at Dallas. He got a few diamonds in the rough. Zach Thomas was a diamond in the rough that he got, and I don't know what went wrong. Was there? Let me ask you this, and I know I know I'm keeping you a little bit longer. Was there tension between him and Marino?
Yes, a lot, because
that may have had a lot to do with it.
Well, one of the things is that Johnson wanted a more of a running game with the Dolphins, and if you know anything about Marino, if he could throw the ball every down, he would. And they dialed down the offense for him, and at one point they even took away his privilege to call audibles. I mean,
wow.
It got really tenuous between between Johnson and Marino. There wasn't a lot of there wasn't a lot of love there.
Yeah, I think that had a lot to do with his lack of success in Miami too. Was that because I remember Marino? What was it? Marino's last game against Jacksonville in the playoffs was a blowout. Yeah. That was not a good way for a legend like Marino to go out. But anyway. All right, guys. Once again, before we get out of here, check him out. Ghost of the Orange Bowl, Jay Rao. Jay, thank you so much for coming on tonight, guy. I look, like I said, us people with masters of useless information, we got to stick together. So we'll definitely have you back on whenever you want to come on, and we'll talk some more. Like I said, top 10 Dolphins, we can do that and compare our list. But thank you so much again, guy. Like I said, guys, Ghost of the Orange Bowl. I'll be sharing his page on the Final Score on all my social media, so you guys can check it out, especially you Dolphin fans out there. I know a couple of you around here that are Dolphin fans. You'll love it. And like I said, thank you again, Jay.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate you having me on.
Anytime, man. Anytime, man. And you guys have a great night. And that's going to do it for the Final Score.